In this next case study, I will walk you through an entire film slate of 5 films. The first film we're going to review is a project entitled The Last Dispatch. Budget estimated at $750,000. The genre is a thriller. The rating is R. The synopsis. A down-on-his-luck journalist stumbles upon a conspiracy involving a powerful tech company. As he digs deeper, he uncovers secrets that puts his life at risk. Director Jeremy Saulnier, known for intense low-budget thrillers like Blue Ruin and Green Room. Lead actor Boyd Holbrook, known for roles in Narcos and Logan. Holbrook brings a strong presence and credibility to indie thrillers. Please note that this project idea and financials are for educational purposes only and may not apply to other projects. No representations and warranties are being made. All right, we got that out of the way. So let's take a look at this low budget thriller here. In the assumption sheet that I put in front of the Excel sheet, based on which I will then run the slate on the second sheet, we start with the financing components. The budget is $750,000. The equity that I have generated by looking at how many non-recoverable finance sources I have, percentage of the budget, how many incentives I have with the percentage of the budget. So the non-recoverable finance sources, which are listed as a percentage of the budget, will be 35% of the budget. The incentives, production incentives, listed as a percentage of the budget will be 20% of the budget. This project will not have a loan. So if I am deducting 35 and 20 from 100%, which is the budget, I will end up with 45% in equity. So within this assumption sheet on the Excel, you will notice that there is already a formula that will lead you to the equity investment that is needed to cover the budget. And because of that, in your assumption sheet, you can change non-recoverable finance sources, incentives, senior loan. All of these things can be changed in the assumption sheet for any project that you would design on your own. The premium is mentioned here as a 20% of the investment because that will become a waterfall item that we're going to look at in a moment. So the equity ends up being 45% of the budget. I do not have a loan in here because there will not be any pre-sales on this low budget movie. So let's take a look at the distribution components for the film. There's not going to be a theatrical release, but there is going to be money generated from streaming, 65% of the budget, and there is going to be money generated from a TV deal, 25% of the budget. The international revenues for this film are estimated to be 70% of the budget, and the distribution fee I'm going to apply here, which is a blended fee, is going to be 10%. I will have a management fee of the investment amount of 2.5%, and I will have a management profit component, a success fee, if you will, of 5% of net revenues. So we'll take a look at this in a moment and see what it looks like in the Excel spreadsheet. But again, I can change every single thing about this. Let's, for example, take a look at the distribution fee, right? If I have a distributor or a sales agent that wants me to charge 25% on international, 10% on the US, I would have a blended rate here that would look different than 10%. It would be 17.5%. So you can change these things also based on the contractual obligations that you will negotiate for your project, which may be very different than what you're seeing here. So you see the assumption sheet here again, and now we're going to implement what we see on the assumption sheet in our Excel slate sheet that is on the next page. So when you download the Excel in this case study, you have all of this on one page on the second sheet. So we're starting with the title and the genre. Down here in the gray zone, you see Last Dispatch, and you see the genre repeated as well as the rating. You're going to see the budget is listed here in the blue zone under finance components at $750. The equity portion, which is 45% of the budget, is listed at $338,000. The premium on the equity is calculated at 20% of the equity. You see here there is no loan. The incentive, which we listed at 20% of the budget, is $150,000. The non-recoupable finance sources, which we list at 35% of the budget, are $263,000. So altogether, I'm looking at the budget line item here in my second sheet, and I'm going to add the equity portion, the loan, which I don't have, the incentive, and the non-recoupable finance sources, which end up getting me the budget of $750. So that's correct. And then I look at what do I need to recoup from these finance sources. So I'm adding the premium and the equity, because those are the only two items I need to recoup. $338,000 and $68,000 have me recoup $405,000 for this film. In the next line item here, I have the distribution components. This movie is not going to be theatrically released, which is why you're not going to see a theatrical value. There will be a streaming value and there will be a TV value. Streaming is going to generate 65% of the budget, which is $488,000. Television is generating 25% of the budget, which is $188,000. So total US revenues are $675,000. The international revenues will be 70% of the budget, which is $525,000. If I'm adding my international sales, $525,000, to my US revenues, $675,000, I end up with worldwide gross revenues of $1.2 million. The distribution fee that I have listed here of 10% would have me deduct $120,000 from the $1.2 million, which will leave me with an adjusted gross worldwide revenue number of $1,080,000. The way I establish the profit is I'm going to take my adjusted gross revenue of the worldwide revenues and deduct the amount that I have to recoup. $1,080,000 minus $405,000 will leave me with a profit of $675,000 on our first film, The Last Dispatch. The next movie idea I made up for us is called Echoes of Tomorrow. It's a $9 million sci-fi, PG-13 rated. In a near future world where memories can be transferred between people, a grieving father attempts to relive his deceased daughter's life by acquiring her memories, only to uncover disturbing truths. The director we envision here is Duncan Jones, acclaimed for his work on Moon and Source Code. He specializes in character-driven sci-fi narratives. The lead actor we're looking at is Daniel Radcliffe, known for Harry Potter and his unique thought-provoking roles in indie films. Again, this idea and the financials are for educational purposes only, and they may not apply to your projects. So let's look at our assumptions. The budget is $9 million. The equity we believe we need to cover this budget is 30%, and it will be recouped with a 20% premium. The senior loan we're generating from pre-sales and GAAP is going to be 45%. The incentives we're going to use when we shoot this movie in a incentivized region is 20% of the budget. The non-recoupable finance sources we have will only be 5%. In the distribution component, we're going to see 25% of the budget generated in theatrical revenues coming net to us. This is after all fees, after everything. 25% would be net. That is 25% of the budget. The streaming that we would get is 35% of the budget in revenues. The TV revenues we would get is 25% of the budget. And we are generating 80% of the budget in international revenues. And this is higher because we have a theatrical release. The distribution fee that I'm going to apply for this is 15%. The management fee that we will charge here is 2.5% of the budget. No, it's actually 2.5% of the equity. My apologies, because it will only be charged on the investment amount. The investment amount is 30% of the budget, and we're charging only on that portion 2.5%. I hope I did say that in the earlier slide, and if not, this is the correct way to say it. Management fees will always be charged on the investment amount. And since we're only raising equity and not the entire budget, the 2.5% would be 2.5% of the equity. All right, management profit, 5% of the net revenue. So let's take a look what that looks like. So we're going to run our assumptions again in the finance and distribution line items here. And again, you find that on the second slide on the Excel that is in this case study. The first slide has all the assumptions. The second slide has all the calculations. This will enable you, again, to change only the assumption sheet to whatever you want to change it to. Your own projects, your own estimates, your own contractual obligations. All right, we have the title here, Echoes of Tomorrow, a sci-fi movie rated at PG-13. The budget is $9 million. The equity portion of that is $2.7 million. The premium in connection with the equity is $450,000. We will pay the premium in the waterfall later. The loan amount for this film is $4,050,000. The incentive for this film is $1,080,000, and the non-recoupable finance sources are $450,000. And if I add the loan, the equity, the incentive, and the non-recoupable finance source, I end up with a budget of $9 million. And when I add the loan, the premium, and the equity, I end up with $7,290,000 that I need to recoup. Now, what do I recoup this from? Well, from distribution revenues. So let's take a look at those. We have theatrical coming in for this $9 million movie, net to us at $2,250,000 after all costs. We have streaming coming in at $3,150,000 because the streaming is 35% of the budget. TV comes in at $2,250,000 because that is 25% of the budget. The international sales, which are 80% of the budget, come in at $7.2 million. Altogether, we're generating worldwide revenues of $14,850,000 on a $9 million movie, and we have to pay a fee, a distribution fee of $2,280,000, which reflects 15% of the worldwide revenues. The fee is higher here than before because we may have to pay some fees for theatrical, etc. The worldwide adjusted gross would then be $16,623,000 after I took my worldwide gross revenues and deducted my distribution fees. Now I take that worldwide adjusted gross revenue, run it against the amounts I have to recoup. That would be $12,623,000 minus $7,290,000. I will generate a profit of $5,333,000 for our movie Echoes of Tomorrow. Our third movie is a $3 million R-rated horror film called Whispers in the Dark. A group of friends rents a secluded cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway, only to be haunted by a malevolent spirit that feeds on their darkest fears. The director is Mike Flanagan, known for Oculus and Dr. Sleep, as well as the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House. The lead actor here, we're thinking of Anya Taylor-Joy, recognized for The Witch and Split, and she has a strong US and international appeal. Again, this is a project that I made up for educational purposes only. No representations and warranties are made. Again, your project might be different and therefore might have other assumptions applicable. The budget here is $3 million. The equity investment that I believe I have to put in here is 50% of the budget, because the senior loan is very low at 25% of the budget. The incentives are 20%, and my non-recoupable finance sources are also low at 5%, which is something you would find in this kind of movie. Theatrical, I'm generating 20% of the budget in a theatrical limited release. My streaming for this film is 35% of the budget, but I will not have a TV deal because it's an R-rated movie. Likelihood is that you will only sell this to a streaming network. The international value of horror movies is very high, so I'm generating here 85%. I should say higher, not very high. It's probably, able to do more than this, but we're staying conservative here, 85%. The distribution fee I'm allowing for this is 20% because potentially I have to pay higher distribution fees because the budget is a little lower. I will apply a management fee of 2.5% of the equity amount and a management profit of 5% of the net revenues. Now those last two fees, the management fees, you will see on the summary slide. They're not going to be in the first calculation slide that have to do with the financing and the distribution components alone. So here is our line item component 4, Whispers in the Dark, budget $3 million, equity will be $1.5 million. Premium I have to recoup on this is 30%, $300,000. I will get a $750,000 loan. I will get an incentive of $600,000 and a non-recoupable finance source. I will generate $150,000. So my budget is covered with the non-recoupable financing of $150,000, the incentive of $600,000, the loan of $750,000, and the equity portion of $1.5 million. I will recoup the loan, the premium, and the equity, which is summarized at $2,550,000. Looking at my distribution, I will generate a small theatrical lease net, which is $600,000, and I have some streaming of $1,050,000 for my first run. And I will not do a TV deal because it's an R-rated horror. I will not expect to do that. The total US would be $1,650,000. The international is going to be 85% because it's the horror genre. That's $2,250,000. Altogether, I'm generating $4,200,000 with this horror movie. My distribution fees in connection with that will be $840,000, leaving me with an adjusted gross revenue of $3,360,000. If I'm deducting the amount I have to recoup, which is $2,550,000, I end up with a profit of $810,000. Reluctant Hero, a $7.5 million action comedy rated 13, is the story of a mild-mannered office worker inadvertently becomes a hero. He becomes a hero when he thwarts a bank robbery. As media attention grows, he must navigate newfound fame and the chaos that follows. The director is Edgar Wright, known for Shaun of the Dead and Baby Driver, great movies, and Chris Pratt, obviously known from the Guardians of the Galaxy and Jurassic World, is someone we're going to give this lead role to. $7.5 million is a very, very, very feasible and reasonable budget with this kind of talent. Could likely be more, by the way. And I will have a 25% equity component for this budget. I'm going to have 40% of a loan, 20% of incentive, and 15% in non-recoupable finance sources. I could probably go up with the equity, by the way, on a movie like this. I could also go up with the budget, just to give you an idea. Theatrical is going to be 30% of the budget. That's my estimate. Streaming, 35%. TV, 25%. And international, 80%. The distribution fee that I believe I can generate here would be 15%. The management and management profit we're going to deal with in the summary sheet. So we're looking at equity, loan, incentives, and non-recoupable finance sources to cover our budget of $7.5 million, and we have to recoup the equity, the premium, and the loan at $5,250,000. From theatrical, streaming, and TV, we're generating a total US revenue of $6,750,000, as well as an international sales revenue of $6 million. The gross revenues of $12,750,000 will then be subject to a distribution fee of $1,913,000, leaving us with an adjusted gross of $10,838,000, which will generate a profit of $5,588,000 after I deducted the recoupable amount of $5,250,000 for a film, The Reluctant Hero. Eternal Journey is a $10 million fantasy adventure that is rated PG-13, and it's about a young woman that discovers an ancient artifact and that grants her immortality. As she embarks on a quest to find a way to reverse the curse, she encounters mythical creatures and unravels ancient secrets. Guillermo del Toro, known for Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water, is the director, and Alicia Vikander, known for Ex Machina and Tomb Raider, will play the lead. The components that are put together for this $10 million movie would include a 25% equity, a 40% loan, 20% incentives, and 15% non-recoupable finance sources. I believe that theatrical can generate 35% of the budget, streaming can generate 45% of the budget, TV 35, and the international revenues for a movie like this, because it's family viewing, would be 90% given it's a theatrical release as well. The distribution fee I'm blending here is 12%. Looking at our finance elements consisting of equity 2.5% alone, 2.5 million, a loan of 4 million, incentive of 2 million, and non-recoupable finance sources of 1.5 million, we cover our $10 million budget. Of that, we have to recoup the loan at 4 million, the premium at 500,000, and the equity at 2.5 million, getting us $7 million we need to recoup. From US distribution, we're generating 11.5 million, and from international, we're generating 9 million. That gets us to a gross worldwide revenue amount of 25 million, and we're deducting a distribution fee of 2,460,000, leaving us with adjusted gross revenues of 18,040,000 and a profit of 11,040,000 after deducting $7 million of the amounts we have to recoup. As we're summarizing our 5 pictures here in the slate, we have a production volume of 30,250,000. The equity portion of that is 8,913,000. That is our fund volume. The premium we have to pay back to our investors summarizes 1,783,000. The loan we have to repay to our bank is 11,800,000. The incentive and non-recoupable finance sources here are each 6,050,000 and 3,488,000. Again, the budget altogether, 3,250,000, and what we have to recoup from our loans, premiums, and equity components will be 22,495,000 in total for this slate. And we look at our distribution revenue summary for our entire slate. We see that theatrical will generate 8.6 million on all the movies, streaming will generate 11,813,000, television generates 7,813,000. The total US revenues will therefore generate 28,225,000. International sales revenues will generate 25,275,000. Altogether, that gets us a gross worldwide revenue of 53,500,000. And when we are deducting our distribution fees of totaling 7,560,000, we will arrive at an adjusted gross revenue of 45,940,000, leaving us with a profit of 23,445,000 after we pay off the amounts we have to recoup. Let's look at our assumption sheet again and review what we have to pay to the investors. The investors making basically that are providing us with the equity investment in our films. If I look at all the investor percentages of each film and I average that over 5 films, I'm looking at an investment of equity of 35%. And that is important to note because that is what my investment criteria for the fund will specify. It will say that we will invest up to 35% of the budget in these films. So that means, yes, I can have certain films where I put in 50% of the budget in equity. I can have certain films where I put in 60% of the budget in equity, but I also have films where I put in less. And so this will average out, and that is fine as long as the entire fund, as we run it, will not exceed 35%. That's one thing. The premium on the fund volume, meaning our equity, needs to be 20%. That's another investment criteria that we will specify. Now, for the fund structure, you might find a different profit component applicable than on the per picture structure. So oftentimes, when you work with family offices or investment firms, they want more profit. It's just what they want because they believe we're taking a higher risk. We're giving you more money than just for one movie. And it would not be unheard of if they would ask for a 50% profit participation component. And so we will run it like that because that's going to be what we potentially have to deal with. So let's look at our summary here. The entire production volume was 30,250,000. The fund volume is 8,913,000. The debt that we're dealing with, the money that will come from a bank, and we need to specify this in our fund as well because it's a leverage component that we have to discuss with the investors. The debt is 11,800,000 total. So if I would look at the fund component, that would be about 40% of the budget, which averaged out is right. So then the non-recoupable finance sources, including the incentives and the non-recoupable other sources from brand integration, from music publishing pre-sales, from maybe some crowdfunding, maybe some in-kind services, anything that's non-recoupable that we can get our hands on. For this fund, it is $9,538,000, which is about 30% of the budget. In my investment criteria, just so you know, for my own funds, I make that 20%. So I basically tell my investors, everything I do will have to be subject to non-recoupable finance sources of 20% for the fund. So in this scenario here, I'm actually above that, which is fine. As long as I'm not under 20%, this is good. So then I'm going to look at my revenue components, and I'm going to spell out how much money did we make with theatrical. We made $8.6 million, which is about 28% of the budgets. How much streaming revenue did we make? We made $19,625,000. That's about 64% of the budget. The total for the US average is $28,225,000, which is about 93% of our budgets. The international is $25,275,000, which is about 83% of the budget. So the total revenues from worldwide gross is $53,500,000, which is 176%. The distribution cost of $7,560,000 averaged out to a cost component of about 14%. And then the entire worldwide adjusted revenues on these films with $45,940,000 average about 151% on the film. So altogether, after I deduct all the things I need to deduct, I end up with $23,445,000 with the costs that I have, which are driven by the loans and the distribution cost. So that averages about 77.5%. So then now here, I'm going to look at my management fees. The management fees are $223,000, which is 2.5% of my equity amount, the fund volume, which is $8,913,000. The profit payments would be 5% of the net revenues. So that is 5% of $23,445,000. So all of that leaves me with net revenues of $22,050,000. So if I look at how much the equity investor makes, let's go to our ROI analysis here. So the equity investor gave us $8,913,000. They made premiums totaling $1,783,000, and they have a profit participation of 50%, which is $11,025,000. So total, they get payments of $12,807,000, which gives them an ROI of 144% on this slate. So take a look at the slate that we put together here for the 5 films. Maybe play around with it a little bit with the kind of movies that you're thinking of making and the revenues that you believe you can generate, as well as the cost that you believe would be applicable, and change that in the assumption sheet to then see how would you, with your slate, do if you apply what applies to your projects in the assumption sheets. So any questions you have, just email me.